But I do have a couple of questions for them, which may set the tone for the poetry. Um, so one of the questions I had, and the title of this session is The Home and the World. And in some ways, reading both Srilata and Syam, I find there is, while Srilata's poetry is very much about the everyday, the domestic, the sort of fraught nature of our relationship with intimate spaces, Syam's is also about place, but in a different way. He writes about the geography, the feeling, the sort of settledness of Kerala. And again, memory plays a huge role in both their work. For Srilata, it is personal memory, it is family memory, it is collective in the sense of family that lives together. And in the case of Syam, it tends to be historical memory, which is somehow burnt into the geographies that we occupy. So I'd like to ask them to maybe just preface their readings with a little bit about, over time, how they have seen their poetry evolve, and then maybe jump into the readings. So Srilata first.
Hi, can you all hear me? Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Usha, for that very warm and generous introduction. So in terms of how I see my work having evolved, I think you're right in your observation that much of my work, much of my poetry especially, tends to focus on this, what we call, well, quote unquote, the small frame of the domestic, of the familial, right? And through that, and that's really my lens or my, the camera through which I look at the world, right? And we all know this phrase, the personal is the political. And I think that whole boundary of what is a big theme, what is a small theme, what's a small space, what's a big space, I think it's completely an illusion, right? Because if you start small and you look at it as you would from under a microscope, you see all those little tiny bacteria and virus floating around, and that's life too. So for me, I think that's how I look at what is worthy of being written about. And very often, female experience, female genealogy, and I grew up in a household where I grew up without a patriarchal figure, right? And I didn't realize how unusual that was until I grew a little older and I went to school, then went to college, and I got married and I entered another sort of a family space. And I said, okay, there's been something very different about how I've grown up, because even though that was a tiny space of the home, there was a way in which there was an expansiveness, because you didn't have somebody around there was no hierarchy, there was a female lineage, so to speak, there was a genealogy of female experience, right? So I think my poems keep dipping into that, and this book, which is my latest, it's called Three Women in a Single Room House, brought out by Sahitya Academy, is really about the idea of space and the idea of gender, I think. If you were to really join the dots and see how the poems all add up, right? I'm not sure they add up, but if they do, that's how it probably is. So I don't know if that answers your questions. You want me to read a few poems now? So this is the title poem. It's called Three Women in a Single Room House. 1. Not too small, not too big. This apartment with its balcony on which our son can ride his tricycle, its kitchen with no walls so we can cook and still belong to the rest of the house, is what I have sold my diamonds for. Thinking over the agent's glibness of my grandmother who had bequeathed them to me. They had once shone talisman-like in the dark of that small room where we three lay. She, my mother, and I, on the floor in a row, three women used to small spaces. 2. My mother is sitting on the only bed in the only room in the house, writing something. When she is done, we find an ink stain on the sheets. One of them is an outstretched wing. 3. My grandmother is working her sewing machine in a corner of the only room in the house. She's making me a dress 2 sizes too large. So you can grow into it, she says. And when it is done, go on, try it. 4. It was never more than 7 steps from anywhere to the only window in the single room house. And I would like to tell you that the sky floated in through the slats, filled us, my grandmother, my mother, and I, with spaciousness. I would like to tell you that we learned to take up space. The truth is, we just grew used to small spaces, the three of us, rough diamonds stuck in mines that ran too deep to catch the light.
Thank you, Srilata, and we will come back to you for more. But Syam, could you think about that question that I raised in terms of the sort of trajectory of your poetry, and then maybe you could read something as well.
First of all, thank you for having me here. Thank you, organizers, and thank you for being here, actually. To respond to your question, I initially start writing in Malayalam, my mother tongue. And then I slowly started writing in English when I was maybe 22 or something. But initially I started translating some of my Malayalam poems into English, and then slowly I switched my language, because for me English is an acquired language. And it is, I mean, for me, because I'm born and brought up in a village in Kerala, and through studies I got this language. So initially when I write in Malayalam, I was also writing about this domestic space and my own regional things, actually. And when I got an opportunity to go to Chennai and see, I mean, for my studies, and see the sea, because I lived near the sea, near Bay of Bengal for almost, my window was opening towards the, I studied in Madras University, and you know, the boys hostel window opens towards the Bay of Bengal. And during the time of Vishu, we have a culture called Vishu Kani, that you have to open your eyes directly towards the God and light. And I used to open my eyes towards the sea during that time, because in the hostel there was, we couldn't fetch this Vishukani. So this idea of sea used to come to my writing just as English arrived inside me. And now I think I'm in a dilemma, actually, because I don't know in which language do I write or think. Because inside me, I think there are two languages fight. And I always think that when I sleep, inside me, that two beings fight, for their survival. Because I write, at times I write one in a poem, maybe a paragraph in English or some in Malayalam, and then I play with words. And so I was talking to K. Sachidanandan about this last time, because it was very difficult to identify the original in writing. For me, I don't have an original, or I don't have a duplicate. I just translate, and when I transcreate, or when I just write from one language to the other, maybe there will be some changes. And then I go back to maybe if I am writing in Malayalam and then I write in English, and I found this English version a little more better, and then I go back to Malayalam and I change so it is very difficult for me to identify what is original. And I think it is the problem of almost every amphibians, because they live in the land and the sea together. So can I read one of my poems? Yeah. This is called Keeper of the Sea, which is the title of my forthcoming book. Keeper of the Sea. Loneliness will show you infinity. Who can speak of one who was destined to watch over the sea for a lifetime? The sea moving beneath his eyelids, the salty wind, an endless desert of water. On the shore, I have seen the sun shuffling across the white sands without shoe or shade. In the dark, in the sea, while men and marine creatures were sleeping, I have seen the earth rising from slumber to quarrel with the stars. Why guard the sea which cannot be stolen away? The guardian angel scoffs. Loneliness, more than a man can bear, envelops me today. Of family, of friendship, of love. Nothing to read save the progress of the waves, the oldest script on earth. Loneliness will show you infinity. It will make you hear the whimper of death in silence. The smell of the dead man is the smell of the sea. In his dreams, I see flowers of sand that crumble at a touch. Was it you who captained that wrecked wooden ship, ancient as the world, marooned on a subcontinent surrounded by 3 oceans? What desire hardened into pain in the heart of a star, only to burst out in 1,000 shards of fire? Whose tears were cold when the wrath of the summer sun raised citadels of clear light in every green sprout? Which flock of flying wings coming home to roost cut the throat of a tired day and offered it to the night? Is there any warrior who is not in love with the sea? Is there any weapon that does not dissolve in her tears? The night and I have witnessed the widowed moon sheltering little hills with her luminous clock. We have seen from mountains the sea emerge in a spray of silver wings, heard the howl of wind-driven water. From the origin of language until their lives shriveled away, my ancestors, keepers of the sea, stood here between the stars and the deep, in rain, in wind, in salt. Now it is my watch, a conch in one hand, fire in the other, heedless of day and night.
Thank you for that, Syam. Just listening to the 2 poems that you read, one, if you're thinking about the gaze, one is an inward gaze of people in a space, and Syam's is obviously an outward gaze looking at a phenomenon that is outside the self, right? But of course, very much connected to the self. And that's just an observation, but I just wanted to ask both of you again one more question and then another round of reading. Many people talk about, in this day and age particularly, as the arts, like poetry, being perhaps the only way we can make sense of the world, because there is no reason, right? You need to find other alternative forms of sense making, and probably poetry and art allow you to do that. And during such a time, do you think that, do we need a politics of poetry, and where do you place those politics? Because in some ways, your poem is very political, if you're looking at it through a feminist lens. And in some ways, you can discern a politics in Syam's, less visible, but it is certainly there. So, yeah, just a question to you. Do you feel like there is a responsibility that poets of the current times have to address big issues, even if you're speaking from the space of the domestic?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So yeah, you're right. I think increasingly you wonder whether, we should be sort of working towards a politics of poetry. But I think I would sort of introduce as like a cautionary note also, because I think poetry is a form that says things slant, no? As Emily Dickinson would say, it arrives at things, at the truth, or whatever you think of as the truth, at your politics. There is no way for you to be a poet and not to engage with the world. So poetry is in a way, I mean, even though it's an aesthetic form, it is a political form by itself, right? So if you sort of place a very obvious sort of heavy responsibility of like, okay, talk about politics and take it head on, I'm also afraid that it might destroy that very delicate thing that it is, you know. And I think we need that. We need hammers, we need loudness in the world in order to say things. So I'm not saying, perhaps very few people will sit down and read a poem and engage with it deeply. And I don't think that kind of deep reading is very common, unfortunately, right? I'm saying this also as a teacher, as a despairing teacher in some ways. But I think there are still readers, and poetry will do its thing. I still have hope and faith that it'll do its quiet thing. So I think that's its space, right? So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I totally agree with Srilata. And yes, poetry, writing, the very idea of writing itself is highly political, of course. But at the same time, because this question is often asked to the writer, but I have never heard anyone asking the same question to A.R. Rahman or no, because musicians are in some other level, actually. But I think every art deserves that kind of serenity, and there is always a kind of art works in a kind of silence as well. It is not always loud. Uh, I mean, it works in subtleties, it works in silence. That is how language work inside. And at the same time, it has political duties as well. But I think it is not the duty of poetry or duty of music. It is the duty of every individual or duty of the citizen to become political as well as to become social and culturally better.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what we can do is have 2 more poems each, because I realize that we have about 10 minutes, and then we can round up.
Okay, so I'll read you this poem, which is, well, somewhat humorous, but it's also a poem on language, on languages, right? Because I realize I'm sitting on a panel with a bilingual poet, and I'm also a translator. So I think there's always that awareness of how language divides and how we try and bridge that gap, and how sometimes there are those gaps, and what do you do about it? So this is called Mr. Swami, Tourist Guide, Mahabalipuram. He looks about 50, but you couldn't be sure. With the mask, there is no saying. Madam from Tamil Nadu, he asks hopefully. I nod. Not my husband though, he isn't. A sigh escapes his lips. Then, we'll speak English, madam. I'm born Trichy. I want to turn the clock back. I want to hear him speak Tamil mellifluously, like they do in Trichy. But it is too late. We are committed to this broken bridge of a language. I am Mr. Swami, he says. I will tell you everything. All Mahabalipuram history, need not to worry. 5 minutes into this, one of us has a question. Mr. Swami smiles. Listen, and then, in the end, only questions, please. At the shore temple, he insists on taking pictures of the 4 of us. My daughter, earphones on, half listening to her online lecture. My son, nervous about posing with his mask off, but COVID's not gone yet, he says. We agree with Mr. Swami that the Pallavas are brilliant. Privately, we whisper, how unfair that the credit always goes to the kings. You see 2 Ganeshas at entrance stop. You know Ganesha? Ganesha is in Hindi language. In Tamil, Pillayar, elephant god. Ganesha, North Indian god in the beginning. Pallava king first to make Ganesha sculpture and include here. But Ganesha is sitting outside the temple only, not inside. In the north, Ganesha having 2 wives, Riddhi and Siddhi. In the south, he is bachelor. In the south, Kartikeya, Muruga, is having 2 wives, Valli and Devayane. In the north, he is a bachelor. All confusion only. Who is bachelor? Who is having wives? We should ask gods only. It's likely a story he tells tourists over and over, but it cracks us up. We laugh for the first time that afternoon. English, Tamil, and Hindi, very nearly forgetting themselves, meeting halfway on that broken bridge. It is for all of us the grief of the unspent life, those coins in our purse that remain small change, the ride offered but not taken, the unreturned gaze, the train with one empty seat that pulled out seconds ago, and the station master gloating, you missed it by a whisker. The things we miss by a whisker, the lives we don't live, and now never will.
So responding to the early poem, I really enjoyed it actually about the poem on language and things. And basically, I think the language that I was trying to talk about is maybe I was just thinking that Kamala Das English. I mean, Kamala Das is from Kerala, and I don't think she would have written in that way if she were completely in Kerala. And A.K. Ramanujan, maybe he was, there in an English-speaking country, and because he was hearing English, that language throughout, yeah, for a long time, and that makes a lot of difference. Because poets always are the beings who connect words, senses, and emotions. Yeah. The mad lighthouse is rooted in the night, not even a firefly nearby. During the day, it sucks the pulse from the wind, faces the thick air, blooms to vastness, revolts against the sun. At night, it investigates the boats at frequent intervals. Covered by parched mosses, the lighthouse pretends to be an old man, feverish. Straggling across the sands of night, screaming against the wind, misleading ships to madness, it dreams of a it dreams of a dripping star that turns the sea blue. The mad lighthouse conquers the moon with one hand, its own shadow with the other, sprays the light into nowhere, howls its madness. Filling insanity in the veins of night, the huge old man flutters across the sea with a pair of light wings for no purpose but destruction. Again, a sea poem. Cartography. Behind the neck, where thought bloom, a birthmark maps an ocean. There, a kiss evaporates into the salty wind. Two exiled bodies meet in the blue meridian. Though vary, their bodies and language mirror dance and poetry. Their forbidden love tastes of salt, smells of unslakable thirst, echoes the depth of blue where compasses vanish. Their entwined fingers whisper like mountain to the sea, to the wind. Secretly they smile. Together they cook, their salty dreams caught in fish eyes. Like the sea opening into a desert, they quench each other, breathing heavily entangled. A submarine volcano unwinding its heat into an ocean deep. Two exiled strangers meet in the expanse, their bodies marked by tears.
Yeah, so I really apologize for this short session, but we are likely to be interrupted very quickly by the interlude, which will then drown out all reading. So I think it's better that we stop before the sound overtakes us. But thank you all so much, and thank you so much, Srilata and Syam, for reading. Their books, Srilata's book is available here. Are your books also there in the stall? Okay. But look for Syam, his new book will be out soon. So thank you all again.